Governor Greg Abbott issued an executive order on Wednesday directing universities to revise their free speech policies. A closer look at the order and how organizations are responding. And finally, social media and politics. In light of recent legislation, court cases, and social media policies, we will sit down with our expert panel to discuss how social media affects political views, engagement, and more. All of this coming up on Tower Talks. Good evening and welcome to Tower Talks, the show where we take a closer look at the stories affecting Texans, Austinites, and students right here at UT Austin. I'm Sophia Kurtz, and tonight we have an expert panel lined up for you to talk about social media in politics. But before we get into that, there is a lot going on across the state of Texas. A Texas woman who was arrested on a murder charge is suing the arresting district attorney's office. In 2022, in the Rio Grande Valley, Texas woman Lizelle Gonzalez was arrested on a murder charge for a self-induced abortion. After 19 weeks into the pregnancy, Gonzalez had a self-induced abortion using the drug misoprostol, according to the New York Times. Gonzalez went to the hospital on vaginal bleeding, where she had an emergency C-section and delivered a stillborn child. Hospital staff reported Gonzalez to the district attorney's office. However, her charges were dropped after the DA's office ruled that they did not perform a thorough investigation and relied on reports from the hospital. Gonzalez is now suing Starr County DA Gosha Ramirez and Assistant DA Alexandria Lynn Barrera on counts of reputational harm and distress. This past Friday, the Third Court of Appeals of Texas upheld protections barring the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services from investigating child abuse for families seeking gender-affirming care for their children. In 2022, PFLAG National and 3 families that were being investigated by the Family Services Department for seeking gender-affirming case sued Texas Governor Greg Abbott, arguing that the state had violated parents' rights to district care for their children. In his 2022 decision, Travis County District Judge Meacham stated that puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and treatment for gender dysphoria were considered gender-affirming care and could be subjected to investigation. In the initial ruling, Meacham believed Abbott's orders went beyond the agency's authority. Now, the state could choose to appeal the appellate court's decision to the Texas Supreme Court, but families who are members of PFLAG cannot be investigated by the Family Services Department for providing medical care to transgender youth in the meantime. This case is among several ongoing cases related to the state's effort to eradicate gender-affirming care for minors. Governor Greg Abbott issued an executive order on Wednesday directing Texas universities to update their free speech policies to, quote, address the sharp rise in anti-Semitic speech and acts on university campuses, end quote. The executive order comes amid the ongoing Israel-Hamas war and said that universities should include the state's definition of anti-Semitism in their policies. According to the executive order, Texas Public University Board of Regents chairs must report to the office of the governor within 90 days with how they are following the order. The order mentions the Palestine Solidarity Committee and Students for Justice in Palestine organizations by name, saying groups such as these should be, quote, disciplined for violating these policies, end quote. The Palestine Solidarity Committee and 10 other organizations responded in a statement on Instagram saying Abbott is mischaracterizing and censoring them. They said Abbott is, quote, resorting to racist stereotypes and misrepresentations of peaceful protests to justify the blatantly discriminatory violation of our First Amendment, end quote. And now, on to our main topic for the night, social media and politics. Last month, Instagram implemented a new feature where users could limit the amount of political content that appears on their feed. And for many users, this feature was automatically toggled on, which sparked frustration by some users online. This comes after a March 13th decision passed in the House, which voted that ByteDance, a Chinese technology company that owns TikTok, must either sell TikTok within 6 months or face removal from app stores in the U.S. The Senate has not voted on this bill as of right now. When we come back to Tower Talks, we will be joined with our panel, but for now we will be going to break.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV. Welcome back to Tower Talks, where we are joined by an expert panel on social media and politics. On the left, we have Cami Vinton. Cami is a doctoral candidate in the School of Journalism and Media, interested in the impact of news, politics, and misinformation on public health behavior. She is also a teaching assistant for media law. On the right, we have Professor Joe Cutbirth, who is a lecturer in the Communication and Leadership major with appointments in the Communications Studies and Journalism departments. Professor Cutbirth had also taught at various other universities and reported for several news outlets. Thank you both for being with us tonight.
Good to be here.
Okay.
Good to be here, thanks.
Yeah, of course. So our first panel topic is about consuming news from social media and the impacts of that on political views and engagement, especially for students. Considering a potential TikTok ban and Instagram's new rules with political content, there's a lot to discuss regarding social media consumption and politics. I'll start with a question for both of you. How are platforms like TikTok and Instagram affecting students' political views and involvement?
Cammy, go ahead.
Well, I think that's the primary source of news for most young people nowadays. And I think that not everybody that consumes that necessarily understands how to be able to tell the difference between good sources versus kind of more questionable sources. So it can impact, I think, people's attitudes if the information that they're getting isn't necessarily correct.
Sure. Well, I think social media, I think you have to realize that social media is a delivery system. It's not really a content creator. So you and I can both engage TikTok, and I can get very, very different signals and information from TikTok and that you're getting from your TikTok, because essentially social media creates what we would call a filter bubble. And we get to, with social media, we get to create our own filter bubble. So I sign up to follow certain people that I want to follow. You sign up to follow other people that I may not follow. So it's not like in the old days when everyone was reading the same newspaper or watching the same network news.
Thank you both for that. What impacts does the mix of traditional media and social media have on student engagement in politics?
I think you should take that one.
Well, I mean, we are in this age of media unlimited, right? Where the sources, the barrage of options that people have. Again, it goes to the notion, I think, of the individual. It's how engaged do people want to be, and then what do they do, and where do they see their citizenship, taking them in terms of, do they want to read or follow local issues to know whether to vote in the school bond election issue, or do they only want to engage in what's on the national conversation about the presidential candidate this week? And so very, very different range, and I think it really always falls back on the individual.
Thank you for that. And I'll add on to this with another question. How does social media change the way young adults view politics and health compared to traditional media?
Well, I think in terms of health, and in terms of social media, we have to look at misinformation, and particularly with the COVID pandemic, we saw a fire hose of misinformation from, everything from, recommendations to drink bleach or to use sunlight or whatever to eradicate the virus, or that the virus wasn't real. So that impacted a lot of vaccination attempts that impacted a lot of vaccination, or it prevented a lot of vaccination, which increased a lot of it increased a lot of the disease level.
And Professor Cuthbert, some questions for you. How has the mix of satire, propaganda, and journalism on social media changed student political engagement?
Well, I don't have any data or can't speak directly to students because I think students are young adults, and I think adults all engage this stuff really in the way that that most of us. I mean, I have a course called Lying and Deception, and one of the things that we know about all of us as human beings is we all have a truth bias. We all tend to want to believe anything anyone tells us. So if you and I run into each other and we're strangers on the South Mall and you say, which way to McCombs? And I say, go down there and take a left. You're probably going to go down there and take a left, right? You're not going to think, wait a minute, was this guy giving me bad information, right? We have a natural tendency to want to believe things people are telling us are the truth. And so I think, sometimes it takes experience to know, and maybe that does come a little bit with more sophistication or more interaction as you age and go through elections or campaigns. Maybe what might not feel right, what you might want to check out more than not. So I don't know, naivete may exist in different levels and different age groups, but I don't think it's unique to what we call young people, which I don't really like that term anyway. So.
Great, thank you for that. Another question for you, Professor Cuthbert. How do social media platforms shape students' views on public health, especially with political content?
Well, I'm gonna defer a little bit on the health thing, but I would just say, one of the things that we did see, particularly in the most recent pandemic, we see confirmation bias. We see in these filter bubbles people creating things that we want to believe things and we want to also feel good. So we tend to look for news that affirms how we want to see the world in general. And so what you saw is people becoming tribal, I think, for the first time during the recent pandemic, becoming tribal and doing some of the behaviors that Cammie talked about, which were insane, to drink bleach or to do some of the other things. But people balkanized, they got in their tribes, and then they started wanting information that confirmed their place. And I think, that happens across the spectrum.
Dr. Vinton, would you like to comment as well? I know public health is sort of your domain on social media.
Yeah, and the politics of it all, I think, really was amplified during the COVID pandemic, where, if you go back even 10 or 15 years, you didn't really see public health matters getting drawn into these big political debates like we see now. And I think that as much as we can sort of separate our politics from what's good for us, what's good for our health, I think we can make better, more informed decisions.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Vinton, another question for you. How might social media strengthen or weaken students' beliefs about science and health news?
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, definitely. How might social media strengthen or weaken students' beliefs about science and health news?
Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor yet. I'm a doctoral candidate. No, that's okay. Hopefully I will be by the end of this year. But I think like Dr. Cuthbert was saying, basically we get into these sort of these filter bubbles where we want to hear from sort of like-minded people, and when you encounter information that sort of aligns with your pre-existing beliefs, it's really easy to just sort of take that on. When it comes to making healthcare decisions, I think that can really cause some trouble for people, just from not knowing necessarily how to find the information that they need to take care of themselves, because they're sort of stuck in this kind of never-ending loop of just sort of the same sort of information, if that makes sense. And I would also say, though, it's really important to sort of not use social media in general to get your health advice. It's probably best to go to your doctor and or trusted sources like WebMD. It's really good.
I would offer just that, one of the things about the delivery system of social media, and one of the things that drew people to it or draws people to it, is the lack of institutional gatekeepers, and people had lost faith in some of that editing function in traditional media. But for a long time in traditional media, with the New York Times or Newsweek magazine or CBS News, you would actually have a health editor. You'd have experts in that type of journalism working there, so that questions could be asked and answered in the editing process of news, so that we knew the veracity, the truthfulness of reports. In social media, anybody can go to X or Facebook and say, I've heard that drinking bleach will cure COVID. And the next thing you know, when I was talking to you about truth bias, even though that sounds ridiculous and absurd and actually dangerous, people forget the source and they just remember the echo. And I think that's one thing that people have to be careful about. Did I read this in the New York Times, or did my minister say this at church last week, or did someone just post it on Facebook? And after a week, people tend to forget the sources but just remember the sound. And I think that's something that social media, that we have to take when we take the existence of social media.
Yeah, and when those things are echoed by political elites or leaders that we, have respect for and care about, it'll just cascade into oftentimes, bad decisions.
Well, thank you both for that. The accessibility of social media across every corner of the globe makes platforms and users very susceptible to misinformation. As newsrooms utilize social media more and more to share their news, promoting media literacy and combating misinformation is becoming more of a priority for journalists and academics. So, a question for both of you. What should journalists, educators, and social media platforms do to address misinformation online?
That's a big question.
Well, traditionally, a role journalists played in our society was to examine, ask questions, and fact-check things that were becoming popular, maybe perhaps that you would start seeing that would become memes or become people are talking about, this is something that's going on, or the anti-vax movement might be an example of that. That people just kind of hear things and they continue to hear the echoes. But journalists would say to a good question in journalist world is, what is your source for that? When someone gives you a quote or tells you something that you feel like you've gotten a good fact right, what I used to teach my journalism students was, it's the most important question to follow up a good quote with is, where did you get that information? To your source, because sometimes journalists will stop with, I just got a really great quote, but they forget to say, I need to check into, did you get that from such and such? And I think that questioning function of journalists for just general social narratives is something that has been lost, but that we need to maybe redouble down on.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out too that it's kind of hard to tell these days, even for people in journalism schools, the difference between journalism and pundits, right, or opinion makers. Some of these shows that, in the small print they say, oh, we're just entertainment, but, they're sitting at a desk like this and they are giving information in a way, they're delivering it the way that we expect journalists to deliver that information. And so it's really hard to tell these days. And so, like Dr. Cutright was saying, it's really important to, I think, as an individual consumer of this information, is to ask, what is that source? How do I know, or how do you know, whatever that information is? And then cross-checking it yourself, right? Going to see if other sources are also saying kind of the same thing or reporting on the same thing.
Thank you. Follow-up question. What are your thoughts on the future of teaching media literacy to handle social media's rapid changes?
For it.
For it?
For it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I have some teenage children in the house, and a couple of them do sort of foray into the social media. And, so they encounter a lot of news on TikTok and on some of the other platforms. And so we just have conversations about it. They hear something really interesting, and, it's just a conversation maybe we're having at the house. And so I'll say, well, that is interesting, where did you hear that? And they're like, oh, I heard it on TikTok. Maybe I should, and then we get out, we call it the Google machine in our house. We get out the Google machine and we see if we can get, cross-reference that. So it's kind of like a media hygiene. And I think the other thing to remember, too, is that any of us can be susceptible to misinformation. If you, just even if you have a PhD in journalism, I've fallen for fake news before. So just having that humility, knowing that, not everything that you read is true, and then just having the willingness to go and find other sources.
Thank you for that. Professor Cutbirth, a question for you. How does social media's impact on politics compare to traditional media's impact based on your experience?
Wow. So I would say just with what we would call the legacy media, or just the more bricks and mortar type of traditional television, newspapers, magazines. But now I think we're far enough in the era that websites may be traditional media as well. And I think social media is always evolving, getting different. It's looking different. I think branding is something that's really important. I think credibility often goes with branding, and if something's been around a long time and people have learned to trust it, they may tend to go to places that have served them well in the past. So I think I know I get news sources. I still read the New York Times because as a young reporter, that was held out as the epitome of it. I just got used to the New York Times, and so even though I don't get the Sunday print edition of the Times, I still read the digital editions, online. So I think we get locked into sometimes those things, and I think so. Perhaps those are generational changes, and perhaps those are technological changes, and I think social media probably is able to reach different audiences in ways that people are looking for instantaneous stuff. I'm looking on here a lot, and I was reading some things on here beforehand that I didn't have a chance to go out and see if it was in the Daily Texan or in the Austin American Statesman. So social media more oftentimes more immediate, kind of the way radio used to be the immediate medium, but deadlines and sources are different. They're evolving.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, like the breaking news cycle.
Yeah.
That's easier. Yeah.
Ms. Vinton, a question for you. What methods should journalists use on social media to reach those skeptical of science within political discussions?
Well, God, I feel like I might sound like a broken record again. Yeah, like I was talking about earlier, I think it's really important just to recognize in yourself, just to know, that there are some bad actors out there, and there's good actors out there too that sometimes put out bad information, right? With this sort of 24-hour news cycle, always trying to be first, and social media is a great conduit to do that. Just recognizing, when something is breaking or when something is sort of immediate, being able to just kind of draw back and realize that, almost like if you feel like, oh yeah, like I really agree with that, that might be the time to actually pull back and be skeptical. It's easy to be skeptical when you disagree with a point of view. So if it's something that you just really feel like, yeah, that's true, just check yourself every now and then and just realize that, you can fall victim to it. It's not always the other people, right? The third person effect, so to speak. It can be you too, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Maybe I can offer something too that just kind of came up in my mind about your previous question. So in a different era with the more traditional media, I was a reporter, but I was a press secretary and a communication director for a while in a couple of political races, 2 governors' races, a presidential campaign. It was very, very important for us in that era to get our candidates into the editorial board room and get the editorial endorsement of the Austin American-Statesman, the Dallas Morning News, the Houston Chronicle, and if we were nationally, the Washington Post, the big papers. If I were doing that now, I don't even think I would even think twice about even just completely blowing off editorial board endorsements of newspapers. You know what I would do? I would have my candidate have an event and then I would have a list of influencers. And I would have my candidate go to a place like Waco, and I would do the event and let the paper or and then I would have set up meetings with social media influencers for my candidate I would bring them into the fold in a way that I think is different and new. I mean, and I just thought that up as I was sitting here, but that I think is a way that I would do things differently if I were in politics right now.
Out of curiosity, what social media influencers in particular might you implement?
Well, it would probably depend. And I think that's what communication directors and press secretaries, that's their job, is to know who those people are in a community and to do that kind of advanced work. So if I were doing something, if I knew there was a particular person who had a following in a community, maybe that following might be some type of social club, maybe it's someone who's done like a food pantry or things like that. People who are out there in the community talking about no-kill dog shelters or whatever those things are that they're looking for. I would find out who those people are in a community, and I think for many people they operate underground. But if I were doing it, perhaps someone who was involved in education, public education, or someone who's involved in public safety, or someone who's an influencer. Those people used to be talk radio. Would be the old example of that, right? Going to a talk radio show, and there still is talk radio. But I think again, those digital influencers might be an untapped resource for politicians that I bet we start seeing a little bit more use of. Or they're probably using them now, and I just don't know about it because I don't follow those influencers. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for those answers. I really appreciate it. When we come back, we'll continue to talk about social media and politics with our panelists. So stay tuned.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us, we are joined by Professor Joe Cutbirth and doctoral candidate Cami Vinton to discuss the intersection of social media, journalism, and politics. Thank you again for joining us today. Let's move on to our next topic, which concerns leveraging social media in political and health campaigns. We've seen how social media can impact society in recent years with political campaigns and the pandemic. So a question for both of you: how are social media platforms being utilized in political campaigns and public health initiatives to engage with younger audiences? And follow-up question to that: what are the potential benefits and pitfalls of this approach? Kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, well, I think we really saw in the pandemic that lots of political actors definitely took that issue and highlighted it, right? So I guess there would be a potential with, people that are in the limelight a lot, like political actors. I think it can draw attention to some kind of health issue. But in this kind of crazy sort of realm where we have just a fire hose of information from social media and all the different voices, I think sometimes it can be really confusing. And then, you have those with agendas who, may not even care about the health topic that they co-op for their political campaign, but they know they can get more support by doing that. So I think, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? It'll bring more attention, but it can also foster confusion, and you always got to look out for those bad actors.
Well, like I said, I've done both. I've been a political reporter, and I've also been a press secretary and a communication director. And I think one of the things that social media really amplifies is the response, right? So social media can, if you're on top of it and you really have a good rapid response, which is a really integral part of any political campaign, you can use social media to respond to things very, very fast, right? If you don't have that and you're not geared up and you weren't foresighted enough to have your campaign or your organized in a way to do that, a bad story, an incorrect story can get out there, and it can be like a piece of paper blown in the wind. If you don't catch it right away, you'll never catch it, and you just look ridiculous trying. And so I think one thing social media can do is it can allow that response. It can allow corrections and response very fast, or the downside of that is if you don't get that, if you're not ready to do that, social media can allow a bad story or an inaccurate accusation to take off. And if it starts at 5 o'clock in the morning with the morning shows, or somebody gets up at 5 and starts tweeting by 7:15, it's on Good Morning America, the Today Show, the AP's picked it up, CNN's got it running, and the next thing you know, it doesn't matter what anybody had planned for 10:30 that day, it's already out there. And so I think that response time, it's really created that 24-hour news cycle in a way that political discourse has to be very, very, very aware of.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you both for those answers. And back to you, Professor Cutbirth. How important is social media in political campaigns today, especially for engaging young voters?
Well, it's a requirement. It's a basic fundamental. You cannot run a successful. I guess you could run like a local campaign for constable without having a great social media presence. But I would even advise someone like that to have that. I would, whether you're a state representative, a state senator, running for the United States Congress, or anything larger than that, social media just allows you. It gives you a distribution system for your message that just dwarfs the old idea of buying a 60-second TV commercial in prime time on a weeknight. In the previous century, that's what people did. They bought like 60-second commercial during Friends or Seinfeld or some big network TV show on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. But our society is just different. I mean, people are looking at their phones. They're doing this. They're listening to something else. They're on their way, and they've got their network that they're in. And so I don't see how you can possibly run a valid or a serious campaign right now without being aware and having social media.
It seems more cost effective too.
Oh, absolutely.
Than purchasing those spots.
Right. People used to make a lot of money selling direct mail. That notion of you would get those postcards, and that's probably the least effective, I think, or the most cost inefficient way to distribute a message is to have someone convince you that you need to have a full-color, slick, glossy thing delivered to someone on Saturday in the mail right before the election, when this thing has been pounding, all week on X or Instagram or Facebook or whatever your social media is.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I got direct mail that wasn't a medical bill. So.
And it really changed who you were going to vote for. You were going to vote for this one judicial candidate until you got that direct mail thing on Saturday before the election on Tuesday, and it changed your whole plan, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right. It's
You see
completely
that
irrelevant.
picture of the person with their family.
But those judicial candidates spend a tremendous amount of money. I get those every year, and I'm always just like, someone really sold them a bill of goods, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Another follow-up question. How does social media's impact on politics compare to traditional media's impact based on your experience?
Well, I think it's changing. It's every cycle, every 2 or 4 year cycle, people are figuring out different ways to use it. figuring out different ways to target. And one of the things that we know now is this micro-targeting of different constituencies and different possible voter blocks. And social media can allow you to do that if indeed you can cultivate and curate your lists well enough to do that. And I think that's a wide open field if someone wants to make some money, consultants.
Well, and I think too, when we do have such a polarized kind of society where sort of half of the electorate's going to go one way and half is going to go the other, and you're looking at 1 to 2 points, that micro-targeting, that's a really good point. That can sway an election one way or the other.
If and I was thinking, and I'm not the expert in the health news thing, but micro-targeting to specific constituencies where health, for example, women have a very different set of health issues that are incumbent that they want to be on top of. LGBT people with HIV and other things like that, you can target, you can micro-target with health news. I think in ways certain groups of people have sickle cell anemia, HIV. There are things, breast cancer. You can get that out there and you can get that news if indeed you've got the curated lists, or you know how to get that, or if you know what those networks are.
Yeah, because Google knows us better than we know ourselves.
Great, thank you for that. Cammie, to you, what ethical guidelines should be considered when discussing health politics on social media to protect public health?
That's a tough one. So the work I'm doing now is actually looking at trying to sort of remove politics altogether from the questions.
Bless you.
I know.
Bless you for that.
So what I did was I got some focus groups together for people that were science skeptics and kind of polarized around not necessarily politics. I didn't go into politics because it's not always one side or the other. There's kind of this idea that people more on the right political spectrum are the science skeptics, and for a lot of areas that is true. But there's some people on the other spectrum, on the other side of the spectrum. We were just talking about Robert Kennedy is a Democrat that is against vaccines. So, so I'm sorry, I lost track. Can you restate the question?
Yeah, definitely. No
Sorry,
worries.
that distracted me earlier.
No, you're good.
So the guidelines, yes, sorry. So what I'm looking at doing is taking that feedback from these focus groups, and I've identified certain trigger words, things that sort of get them kind of ramped up and upset and makes them want to disengage, and as it turns out, across the political spectrum, people don't want to mix politics with their health. Like, that just sort of makes them disengage, especially if it's the other guy, So we've also identified some trigger words that tend to, that journalists use a lot, that, for lack of a better term, just make people mad and they just throw it away. They're like, oh, 3 words in, I'm not going to learn anything from this. So we're looking at maybe using different ways of framing information so that we can extricate the politics and the inflammatory language that reminds people of politics, and then gets them kind of in a bad mood, and they don't want to engage with that information.
Great. Thank you for that answer. As we're coming to the end of our panel discussion, I have a final 2-parter question for the both of you. Considering the evolving landscape of social media and its profound impact on politics, public health, and society at large, how do you envision the future role of these platforms in shaping democratic engagement and public health awareness? And what steps should stakeholders take to ensure these developments contribute positively to society?
That's a lot. Well, I'll step in. Fundamentally, hopefully what we have in this country is we have a marketplace of ideas, and we have a space where we can all come in and talk to each other and have conversations. And hopefully, journalism's task, I believe, if you go back and look at the history of the First Amendment, and I won't bore you with all of that, but really was to create and enable people to have the type of conversations they needed to be autonomous and to perform in a democracy. And that would be the traditional role of journalism. And so, one of the things I think we should think about is how do we use or assemble or create or access whether it is traditional media or social media, in a way that creates the type of conversations that people need to have to live the lives they want to have in a society without harming someone else. And I think that's really a key to it, is that notion of the responsibility of do no harm. We can have conversations that educate people instead of having conversations that try to hold the other side down until you get 50% plus one and then let the other side drown, right? That we all have to work together, that we're in this thing together. And if we can use these things, if entrepreneurs in the spirit of this country that's created these things can harness them to allow us to have the type of civil discourse and the civic-minded responsibility of helping each other rather than dividing each other, that's my hope for it all. Knock on wood.
Yeah. I think I agree with everything that you said. I think with social media, right now our legislator, at least our legislation in the U.S., doesn't really know how to classify it, if it's a publisher or a distributor or whatever. And so it's really difficult, I think, to until we decide what social media is, I think it's really hard. As academics, we can dream all day about how to fix the system, right? But until we understand what the rules of engagement are, until we label, okay, what is this? What law does this fall under? I think we're all just kind of sort of stuck where we are.
20 years ago, I'll date myself a little. 20 years ago when I was teaching media class, University of Houston, I was teaching the FCC and media markets. Right. Well, there's no such thing as a media market, or there's certainly not a geographical media market for social media. Right. I was teaching like B markets, A markets, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio is the A markets, Wichita Falls, Abilene, Corpus, Laredo is the B markets. How the FCC, regulates and kind of like restricts, where the local network affiliates. That model's out the window. Right. And social media has. We have progressed so far beyond that, and so I think we just have to as we're going forward, understand again what you said. What is this thing? How does it work? And not try to pigeonhole it and make it a new iteration of something in the past, but really kind of look at it for what it is and learn, how to use it for the betterment of all of us.
Thank you both for that. And thank you all for joining us. When we come back, a sit-down with Gabrielle Beacon, a graduate research assistant with the Propaganda Research Lab at the Center for Media Engagement. Stay tuned.
"13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth."
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good morning, Longhorns. Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good morning, Longhorns. Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Welcome back to Tower Talks. Last week, Tower Talks executive producer Ariba Barmel sat down with graduate research assistant Gabrielle Beacon. They talked about how social media can affect political engagement and more. Let's take a look.
So there's a lot of evidence, right, that young people, and now it's across all ages, but especially young people get their news from social media. And of course it matters how it's presented on social media and what you're seeing on social media, because you'll take that into your daily lives and your civic life, political life. So it has become a major source of news and information for young people. And what I'll say is that, because there are a lot of studies out there that specifically look at how prevalent the actual consumption of news is on social media feeds and timelines and things like that. But so much news is now interwoven and, entertainment pieces and more like human-centric stories as well, that even if you aren't consuming quote-unquote like a typical news piece, there could still be elements of, you know, news and political information within the information that you're consuming. There definitely have been studies to show that political participation that social media has encouraged political participation online. Whether it necessarily turns into voter turnout, that has been debated. You know, there are instances showing where, yes, like it has increased voter mobilization, people are going out to vote, but also at the same time, you know, it is shown that a lot of people are still confined to the realm of the digital spaces in terms of their political participation. So something, you know, that has a lot of literature about this is digital activism, right? So trying to, you know, promote or bring awareness to a certain social movement on social media. There's, you know, the clicktivism where people simply like a post about, you know, a social justice movement. Someone could share it, someone could comment on it, maybe post it to their own story, for example, if it's like on an Instagram. But sometimes that doesn't exceed the digital realm into offline spaces. Although there are other cases where, because of the organizational efforts that are enabled on social media and online spaces, that has actually led to offline mobilization and offline protest. So again, it's kind of this two-sided where it does have the capability for fruitful effects offline, and it also has the capability to just recirculate political participation within a digital realm without necessarily transforming over into the offline realm. I think, you know, not just reading and believing necessarily. It's kind of like when we talk about digital literacy, some of the tools that you can use, for example, looking at the source of the article, who actually created it, looking at the authors, you know, have they produced other work. Also, even just simple things like looking at the date. This is, you know, particularly important for, you know, recently, like circulation of images that actually, for example, are from years ago, but they're being presented as images from now. So sometimes even just looking at the date of articles can also be helpful to curb the spread of, in this case, what would be misinformation. And also, of course, it's always helpful to find multiple sources on one topic. So, you know, even, you know, incredible journalistic outlets, they're going to cover stories a bit differently, right? So even just reading other stories, you'll learn new information, or you'll see information that perhaps is contradicting one another, and you might want to look into that further. But yeah, there's definitely like little steps that people can do to feel more empowered. And I know it sounds, you know, silly just looking at, you know, what is the website and, you know, when was this actually made, but this can be a reason for the spread of misinformation online, even just little simple things like that.
Tune in next week to hear about food insecurity on UT Austin's campus, which is actually a food desert. Be sure to follow us on social media at TSTV Tower Talks on X, formerly Twitter, and at Tower Talks TSTV on Instagram. From all of us here in the studio, thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.